Hi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tim Waggoner. I am a three-time Bram Stoker Award winner. Published around 50 novels, 7 collection of short stories, and also the author of the writing guide, Writing in the Dark, which is all about writing horror. Today I'm going to read for you the opening scene from my new Flame Tree Press novel, We Will Rise, which comes out in July. This is a ghost apocalypse novel, so instead of zombies coming to attack the world and kill everybody, it's ghosts. So this is chapter 1. In Echo Springs, it started with Eddie Herrera. Eddie worked third shift at Steiner Tire and Rubber. STR, as the town's residents referred to it, was the largest employer in Echo Springs and had been since the 1950s. The company had been downsizing some in recent years, and Eddie, who was on the wrong side of 40, was grateful he still had a job. A lot of his co-workers had been laid off, and he kept wondering when his time would come. He had a family to support, and the thought of losing his job made him feel sick, so he did his damnedest not to think about it. He was always exhausted by the time he got home in the morning, but despite how much he wanted to, he didn't fall into bed right away. He and Anna had 2 boys, ages 6 and 8, and he liked to see them off to school in the mornings. He often made breakfast for everyone, and today it had been waffles. Once the boys were on the bus and headed to school, Anna had taken his hand and led him to the bedroom. He was never too tired to spend time with his love. An hour later, Anna got dressed, gave him a quick kiss goodbye, and headed off to do the week's grocery shopping while he hit the shower. He liked to wash the night's work off him before he slept, and standing under the water relaxed him, got him ready for sleep. As he stepped under the warm, almost hot spray, he sighed in contentment. His balls ached pleasantly, and he was sorry Anna had gone. It would have been nice to go for round 2. Maybe if he was still awake when she got home. Smiling, he squeezed body wash onto his hands and began rubbing it on his skin and hair. He still marveled that he was capable of enjoying water like this. For a large part of his life, he loathed water and had wanted as little to do with it as possible. But thanks to Anna's love, support, and understanding, not to mention a significant amount of therapy, not only could he tolerate being in water, he actually liked it. It was practically a goddamn miracle. In fact, he liked standing in the shower and feeling the warm spray caress his body so much that he often lost track of time and would remain in the shower until the water started to grow cold. He knew it was a waste of money. Water wasn't free after all, but he couldn't help himself. It just felt so damn good. As he began scrubbing his hair, he started singing Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. He was an admittedly terrible singer, but he was alone in the house right now, so he could belt out tunes at whatever volume he wanted, without either Anna or the boys saying he sounded like a dying dog. After a couple lines, he noticed something smelled strange, and he broke off his song. He inhaled deeply through his nose and detected the fruit mixed with menthol odor of his body wash. But there was a second smell beneath that, a rank scent of dead fish and rotting vegetation that he hadn't smelled for almost 30 years, but which he instantly recognized. His bowels turned to ice, his pulse galloped, and his stomach gave a queasy lurch as if it were going to eject the waffles he'd eaten. It was a struggle, but he managed to keep his food down. God, that smell! Lake water. And not just any lake. White Stone Lake. He had to get out of here. Now. He didn't bother turning the water off, didn't even consider doing so. All he wanted was to get away from this horrible stench, grab a towel, and rub his skin raw until he got the stink off him. But the shower door wouldn't budge. It was a simple door, 2 overlapping panes of clear glass that ran along a metal track, the same as millions of others. It had no lock. Who the hell would need to lock themselves inside a shower? But no matter how hard he pulled, he couldn't move either pane, couldn't even make the glass shake. It was like the bottoms of the panes were embedded in concrete. While he fought with the door, the rancid lake water smell grew stronger, and the spray coming from the shower head began to grow cold, the water turning thick and brackish. He heard a voice then, words disoriented and wavery as if the speaker were underwater. "Hey, Eddie. Miss me?" The water was ice cold now, but the chill that gripped Eddie's heart upon hearing his brother's voice was far colder. A memory came to him unbidden, a small boat in the middle of a large lake, a man sitting at the stern, fishing rod resting easily in his hands, his gaze fixed on the red tip of the bobber 20 feet away. 2 young boys were also in the boat, one sitting in the middle, the other at the bow. They both had simple cane poles, and their bobbers floated only 10 feet from the boat, if that. Eddie, who at 7 was the older brother by 4 years, hated sitting in the middle. He should be at the bow, not Randy. It was a much more awesome place to sit, and as the oldest, it should have been his place by right. But before they left the dock, Randy had whined and begged until Dad had let him sit at the bow. As bad as giving up the bow seat was, being forced to fish with a cane pole was worse. He was big enough to use a rod and reel, but on shore Dad had taken him aside and explained that Randy wasn't old enough to use anything but a cane pole, and a small one at that. He's not strong enough yet, not coordinated. Eddie hadn't seen what any of this had to do with him, but then his father had added, Randy will be jealous of you if you get to use a rod and reel and he doesn't, so I need you to use a cane pole too. Eddie had protested that he'd been allowed to use a rod and reel the last time he'd gone fishing with his dad. It was just the two of us then, Dad had said. Now Randy is with us, and I need you to step up and be a good big brother. Can you do that for me? Randy had wanted to ask Dad why he wasn't going to use a cane pole too. Wouldn't Randy get jealous of him as well? But he knew better than to backtalk his father. The man was kind and gentle until you showed him any disrespect. Then he got mad, really mad. So Eddie had nodded reluctantly, and Dad had smiled and put one of his big hands on Eddie's shoulder. Good boy. The boys both wore puffy orange life jackets, but their father didn't. I'm a strong swimmer, he'd explained. Eddie thought he was a good swimmer too, so why did he need a life jacket? But he didn't argue that point either. They'd been out on the water for what seemed like hours, and none of them had caught anything. Even more irritating, Randy kept casting his line too hard on the worm, which Eddie had to slide onto the hook for him, would fly off every time. Whenever Randy pulled in his line to check the hook, which was often, Eddie had to bait it again. Randy also had a habit of humming tunelessly as he watched his bobber rising up and down with the motion of the water, and the sound was driving Eddie crazy. If Dad hadn't been there, he would have shouted for Randy to shut the hell up, and he would definitely say hell to underscore how angry he was. But all he could do now was glare at his little brother and grind his teeth. He was so irritated at his brother that when he noticed Randy fiddling with the buckles on his life jacket, he didn't say anything about it, although as a good big brother, he knew he should have. But right then, he didn't care if the little jerk fell into the water, sank, and never came back up. Eddie's life had been so much less complicated, so much better before Randy's arrival. So, Eddie did his best to ignore his brother, and he didn't know anything was wrong until he felt the boat rock and heard a splash. Maybe Randy had gotten bored, tried to look over the side of the boat to see if he could spot any fish, and fell in. Or maybe he'd gotten a bite, or thought he had. Stood up to try to pull his line in, lost his balance, and fell overboard. Whichever the case, Randy was no longer seated in the bow. His cane pole floated on the lake's surface, and an instant later was joined by Randy's life jacket. Randy had messed with the buckles and straps so much that the jacket had slipped off of him in the water. Eddie had heard that drowning people always rose to the surface 3 times before sinking for good, but Randy didn't come up even once. Dad jumped into the water immediately after Randy went overboard and dove downward, searching for his younger son, but it was no use. Eddie's brother was gone. Later, a rescue crew would drag that part of the lake and recover Randy's body so at least his family could bury him, but it wouldn't be much comfort. Neither of Eddie's parents blamed him for Randy's death, at least they never said so out loud. But Eddie had blamed himself, and although as the years passed he'd come to understand that what had happened had been a terrible accident, and there was nothing he could have done to prevent it, he still blamed himself deep down. It was why he'd made sure the boys had started swimming lessons early on, so they wouldn't end up like poor Randy. Sometimes his guilt manifested in his dreams, and he'd be the one that fell into the lake and drowned instead of his brother. And as he sank down to the cold, dark depths, he'd hear, from a great distance, Randy laughing. After that day, he'd never gone out into the water in a boat again. He'd never gone swimming. When he took his boys to the pool, he always made sure to stay several feet from the edge. It was as if he feared that if he got too close, the water might surge forth, grab hold of him, and pull him in and drag him down and hold him under until he died the same way Randy had. The brackish water blasting from the showerhead grew even colder, and the shock of it brought Eddie back to the present. Water pooled around his feet, the level rising fast, and he realized that the drain was clogged. He shouted for Anna, even though he knew she probably wasn't home yet, and when she didn't answer, he began pounding on the shower door with his fists. He knew that if he managed to break the glass, there was a good chance he'd be seriously cut, but right then he didn't care. He was in the grip of full-blown panic, and his body reacted on its own. He slammed his fists against the glass over and over, continually shouting Anna's name, his voice eventually devolving into wordless cries of despair. The shower door shook under the impact of his blows, but the glass didn't so much as crack. The water level in the shower had risen to his ankles by now, and frigid water continued blasting from the showerhead in an arctic torrent. His body shivered uncontrollably, and his teeth chattered, and he wondered if the cold would kill him before the water rose high enough to drown him. He hoped it would. Any death would be better than drowning. Drowning's not so bad. Let me show you. A pair of small hands gripped Eddie's ankles and with surprising strength yanked him downward. The shower door seemed to melt away to nothing, and Eddie found himself descending into cold darkness. He gasped reflexively as he went down and drew water into his lungs. He coughed, inhaled, coughed again, took in more water. His lungs burned, became heavy, and his panic gave way to animalistic terror. He hadn't gone swimming since Randy's death, but his body remembered how, and it thrashed in the water, trying desperately to push itself toward air. But those small hands, a boy's hands, Randy's hands, were clamped tight around his ankles, and it was as if a great weight was dragging him downward, one so heavy that he could not fight it. Water roared in his ears, but despite this he had no trouble hearing his brother's voice, the sound that of a boy, the words eerily adult. Try to relax. Even if I let you go, it wouldn't matter. There's no surface here. No bottom either. Just water in all directions, extending outward forever and ever. Once you get used to it, it's really quite peaceful. Eddie couldn't make a sound. His mouth, throat, and lungs were filled with water. But he spoke to Randy in his mind. Don't do this, please. I have a wife and 2 sons. He'd been descending deeper the entire time, but now he picked up speed as if Randy was pulling him faster, eager to take him as far into the inky blackness as possible before he died. I'm sorry, Eddie, but this is the way it has to be. Your time has come. Everybody's has. And there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it. A pause and then, who am I kidding? I'm not sorry. I fucking love this. You're just getting what you deserve, brother. And so will everyone else. Eddie's lungs spasmed as they attempted vainly to draw in one final breath of air, and then they grew still. A darkness came from him then, one that was blacker than the water that surrounded him, the water that had become his entire universe. This darkness filled him, swept him away, and he was gone. And in his last seconds, did he feel some small measure of relief that it was over, that he'd finally repaid a debt to his brother that was long overdue? Maybe. Thank you very much.